Welcome to the Living Loud and Proud podcast, brought to you by Disability Pride, Pennsylvania. If you need a link to the transcript for this episode, please visit our accessible website at www.disabilitypridepa.org/podcast. And now, here is your host, co-producer Phill Rosen.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Living Loud and Proud podcast. This is episode 4, all about Harrisburg Disability Pride, and we're going to have a Capitol crawl similar to what happened in DC in 1990. But first, before we get started, I want to thank our corporate partners at Highmark Whole Care for sponsoring the Living Loud and Proud podcast. Today, I have our Executive Director of Disability Pride Pennsylvania, Vicki Landers, on, and she's going to tell us all about what's happening in Harrisburg on the 1st of May. Hi, Vicki.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm so excited about May 1st. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the Capitol crawl that happened in DC on March 12th, 1990. We had 68 people get out of their chairs, throw their crutches away, put away their walkers, and actually climbed, I believe it was 78 stairs to the top of the Capitol building. And this was one of many actions that happened to get folks to sign off on the ADA Act. And it's so important to remember that. It's important to remember the folks that have made history, that are a part of our history, the disability history. So we wanted to honor that and make sure everybody knew about what that is. There's a really great article on issue.com, and that's issuu.com, if you want to look that up and learn more about it. I just wanted to make sure that we held a place for that, remember to honor our past, and I'm really excited because we are going to be hosting our own Capitol crawl in Harrisburg on May 1st. The rally starts at 12, press conference starts at 1, and we'll lead the charge to start the climb. And I'll tell you much more about that afterwards. But first, we wanted to give a story about what one person's recollection of what happened that day. And we wanted to have you hear about what that felt like. And so our producer, Phill Rosen, sat down to interview Jimmi Shrode about his partner, Erik von Schmetterling's experience at the Capitol crawl in DC. Unfortunately, Erik is not with us anymore. But we are so excited that Jimmi was able to talk to us about this. So you're going to hear from Jimmi now.
Jimmi, so the Capitol crawl happened in Washington, D.C. in 1990. What was it all about?
The Capitol crawl was basically the ADA was stuck in Congress. Stuck in both houses. I can't remember which, but it was stuck. And ADAPT really wanted to call the need to get this passed because they had been fighting for it for a couple of years. And ADAPT had reached out to many different disability organizations and saying, if we give one big push, we could get this through. And we could get this signed into law. And it was really to call attention to the fact that around the United States, there was no real basic access. And when we're talking about access, the most fundamental access is your ability to go out into the community and interact in the community. I was dating Erik then, and we had been dating for about like almost a year. And there would be times if we wanted to go to a restaurant or something, I would have to go in to the restaurant and tell the manager, my date is outside and he would like to come in, and, but you have steps. So do you have something that you do for people with wheelchairs? And a lot of times they would look at you like, somebody in a wheelchair is outside, they're not in the hospital or they're not in a back room somewhere. But that's the way the idea was.
Right.
And they would look at you like it was like candid camera, but so the idea was that we really needed basic physical access to stores, to coffee shops, libraries, a lot of different public accommodations. And the idea to demonstrate that need was that a lot of people, especially people in wheelchairs, would have to sometimes have their wheelchair brought inside, and then they'd have to kind of crawl up the steps or be helped up the steps. So what better way to dramatize what was everyday life experience for a person with a physical disability, especially people who use wheelchairs, than to climb up the steps of the U.S. Capitol, which there was a whole lot of them, and do what you have to do in your community to really say, look, this is really something we need. And it was a big undertaking. A lot of different disability organizations didn't always agree with ADAPT and their direct action and everything, but somehow the stars aligned and a lot of people came together and did this dramatic thing, going up the Capitol steps one by one by one by one. And Erik told me that's what he was going down. He was going down to Washington to do a regular ADAPT action, but the last day was going to be the Capitol crawl. And he asked me to take care of Bugsy, his cat, and while he did it. And I was intrigued. I began getting very interested in I was in college at the time, but I'm like, man, I got to go on one of these things. These sound really awesome. But that was it, to really say this is what people with disabilities face every day just for basic public access. And here it is dramatized for the free world to see, people up, 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 one step at a time.
Wow, that's really powerful. I had heard about the Capitol crawl before. I knew a little bit about it, but I only knew like kind of the surface level of stuff. And so you're talking about Erik. He was there. What was his experience like? Do you remember what he, any stories he had?
Yeah, it was a warm day, and it's Washington, D.C. in springtime and can sometimes get really warm. It was a very bright and sunny day and everything. And for him, he had problems with his heart at that time. So, for him breathing, he needed oxygen, So for him, going up those steps was really excruciating for him. He almost passed out twice. He had to stop and rest and everything. And somebody offered to kind of boost him up the way, but no, he wanted to do what everybody else was doing. But it was really warm, and he almost felt like he passed out twice. It was really difficult because of the weather. It was warm, it was sunny. People have been, a lot of the ADAPT people have been doing actions, so already they were kind of tired and everything. And I don't know how many steps there are going up to the Capitol. there a lot. You know, and it was very physically demanding for a lot of people, and some people did kind of pass out doing it because, you know, a lot of people weren't in the greatest physical shape because they, you know, how many times do you do something that physically demanding? I think even for us, if we had to do it, you know.
Yeah, I think that would be a tall task, tall order for me, for sure.
And it was, you know, there were a lot of tourists in DC around that time. The weather was warmer and people were just watching and their mouths were hanging open. That's what Erik told me. And he said people were just stunned, and it really caused reverberations throughout the US Congress and made, you know, a lot of people. And George Bush, the first, really wanted this done. And so this really caused reverberation throughout Congress and all through Washington, D.C. And it was the final push needed where the ADA got signed into law, where it finally moved. It passed both the House and the Senate, and then went to George Bush's desk and he signed it. So, in a great ceremony, but that was later in July. And Erik and a lot of people who had crawled up the Capitol steps were invited to be at the White House lawn for the signing of the ADA.
Yeah. You know, that's really interesting that you talk about George Bush really wanting that piece of legislation. I think it's one of the pieces of his legacy as a president that I find really striking, even as someone who may not agree with all of his perspective on everything. Right. But, you know, the fact that he kept talking as he got older about how the ADA was integral to his life as he got older and he became, you know, more dependent upon, you know, technology like wheelchairs and other mobility aids and such. And how important that was, I think, for him because of that.
Yeah.
So it was stuck in Congress at the time. You know, you say you don't necessarily recall which house it was stuck in. Were there any prominent members of Congress that were particularly like against it that you remember at the time?
I don't really remember. I should have probably read up on it before I did it, but you know, I'm getting older now, so my memory isn't as great as it once was and everything. It was just one of those things where it was kind of languishing. It wasn't that, you know, there were people who were against it, like as an unfunded, you know, government mandate, you know, and how it would impact business because business people were really concerned, like, now I'm going to have to build elaborate, you know, ramps and elevators and whatnot, you know, to make my place accessible. And do I even want these people in my business? You know, which is another, you know, attitude of society and everything, which was more prominent in 1990. You know, so I can't remember, but it was just kind of languishing. It was like one of those things. It wasn't like a big burning priority for either, you know, chamber, but at the same time, it's something that was really needed, and ADAPT had been working towards that for a long time. It started when they took over a bus on Alameda Street, I believe in Denver, Colorado, the original Gang of 19. And, you know, that's where it all began. Wade Blank had, you know, taken people out of nursing homes and developed the Atlantis community and that idea of independent living and everything. But now that we've got out of the nursing home, we're in the community, we need to be able to thrive in the community. And to thrive means that there has to be access. So, but it was languishing. So there was no burning need for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's interesting too that you were talking about how Adapt, um, teamed up with a bunch of organizations that were, they're all activist organizations, right? But they don't always necessarily agree with each other. Um, what kind of, I mean, do you happen to have any knowledge of what led to them kind of allying together, becoming an alliance for this one event? Because I know that Adapt still has some organizations that don't love them, right? Because they are so in your face and direct action minded.
This was more, it was more, I guess, theatrical and more of a demonstration than what Adapt would usually do. Adapt would usually, like, if there was a senator or congressperson against the bill, Adapt would go into their office and take it over and wouldn't leave until they talked to the person and the person gave them some kind of commitment. And a lot of people, not even the disability community, but a lot of people in general are not comfortable with direct action that involves going into the places of power and seizing it and forcing the people to talk to you. A lot of people, feel embarrassed, scared. What if I get arrested? What if they take my Social Security away? There was a lot of that. So, the thing about Adapt was it was a lot of people who had been forced up against the wall. They had nothing left to lose. And so you either shut down or you fight back, and Adapt would fight back. But the idea of doing this, it wasn't taking over somebody's office. It wasn't doing anything directly confrontational. It was making a big show of why this was important by going up these steps. And so a lot of people felt like, yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what makes it such a powerful sort of action, right? Because it's one thing to go in behind closed doors and bully someone into agreeing with you, but when you're doing something and people are watching in public, it's like, oh no, what's going on? What does this, what does this mean? I don't understand. And they start learning a little bit more about it, and they're like, wait, why not? Why is this a problem? It's interesting too, because a lot of younger people nowadays, they experience like I have to talk to someone inside. Do you have a ramp to get up into this one step? And yes, that's annoying, but like you were saying before, you had to go in and people would literally carry the wheelchair in, and people would have to crawl. And it's like, yes, it's a big brouhaha. Yes, it's a lot of effort and everything to go about your daily life doing that. If you have to go into say 15 different places in a day, and you have to ask each one, do you have a step, or a ramp into this, that I can use? But that's still a lot better than literally having to crawl up and kind of that sort of embarrassing sort of display, right? Because nobody wants to crawl unless at all, unless they absolutely need to, right? So it's like, and I think that's one of the things that's really really powerful about it as well, because it's like, yes, things maybe aren't as good as they could be, but they're sure a hell of a lot better than they used to be, right?
It's a lot better. And one thing too, I mean, I was dating Erik around that time and everything, and Erik told me dating people sometimes would be difficult because you would try to go to a restaurant or something like that, and it would be too much. The person you're dating, their mind is blown, and it was such an affront to your personal dignity, because not only are they carrying the wheelchair in, you're scooting yourself up the steps. The steps are dirty. You wanted to dress. We want to dress and look nice when we go out on a date and everything. And your hands are getting dirty. Your clothes are getting dirty. You're crawling on the floor and everything. So, and there's just a generation now of kids that, will never know that.
Right. And forget about it if it's
raining. Things go back, you never know.
Right. Well, and I was just saying, I wasn't trying to cut you off, but forget about if it's raining, right? Like that screws up your entire night, right? You don't want to have a wet butt sitting in the restaurant.
No,
that's terrible.
You don't. No.
Well, some people, I'm sure, but
no, it's like and weather would actually determine that. Do you want to go out to eat tonight at a restaurant? It's supposed to rain if you have to crawl up those steps. Going to the movies, the wheelchair would have to park in the aisle. And you would get the manager saying, well, this could be a fire hazard if there was a fire, if there was an emergency. Now they have they have thing where they've taken out some of the seats so a wheelchair could pull in. I think it'll be perfect if they take out 2 seats so people in wheelchairs dating can sit side by side and not have to sit separated from each other. But yeah, there was so much just to live an ordinary life involved all these logistics.
So I've actually been reminded here. I've completely blanked on just asking you who Erik was. So who was he?
Erik von Schmetterling. He was my partner for 31 years and outspoken disability rights activist. Before that, he was a cardiologist, and he had been working in, Cleveland, Ohio, as a young doctor, a young cardiologist working in the emergency rooms. And then he began losing feeling in his legs, and, he couldn't move very well, and he was losing his feeling, and they didn't know why. Then he had a pulmonary embolism. So he became disabled, and, he began looking for, well, what do I do now? And moving to Philadelphia, he met, other people with disabilities like Cassie James and everything. And she went to college at the old community college on 11th Street, where she had to crawl in to get in there just to get an education. So disability rights really became his life, and he really was fiercely passionate about it. And, when I had met him, it was a part of his life, and he asked me, how did I feel about that? And I said, doesn't bother me. I had done stuff with ACT UP, and also protesting for gay rights and everything. And so I was like, wow, I think it's great that you have a social conscience and see social activism as a viable way of doing it. So, but yeah, that was his life's work, and that's what he really fought passionately for. And he became like a leader in national ADAPT for a time, as well as local ADAPT and everything. And, it was just amazing that, that we went through that together as a couple and everything. And I got involved in it myself and, saw the need for this, and I understood the need for it.
Yeah. And actually, I actually, to follow up with that, I do want to ask you, what is ADAPT? Because I realize some people might not know.
ADAPT began originally as American Disabled for Accessible Public Transport. That's what it began, because the original idea was to get accessible transportation, over the road buses, and from there the push, and to do that the ADA was part of the key to kind of get that. If we can get a national disability, access law passed, then buses would have to become accessible. So that was the main focus, was accessible transportation. And the rest of it just went from there. And after the ADA was signed and everything, ADAPT said, well, what's next? Now that we're making society acceptable, what's the main reason why people are put in nursing homes? Because society has an attitude that you need to be taken care of. You can't be a part of the world because the world is not made for you. So now the idea was, let's get people out of nursing homes so they can begin enjoying the fruits of the ADA. And with the Olmsted decision, the ADA figured that a state entity, and had to provide the most integrated setting in the least restrictive environment. So the ADA affected the Olmsted decision, which said, you have the right to self-determine. You have the right to live someplace that's the least restrictive environment, which is an institution. An institution, you're there, you're locked up behind four walls like you're in prison, and you do what they want you to do, arts and crafts, playing bingo, rotting slowly away on the inside, and you'll go to bed when they say you go to bed, and you'll get up when they say get up and everything. And the entire world goes on outside of those four walls. So the ADA really opened up so much of that. So, it became Americans Disabled for Attendant Programs Today. And the idea was now for ADAPT to get rid of the institutional bias, to get people out of institutions into the communities, and that being disabled means that you don't have to be locked away. You're not a dirty secret. And the whole idea was that you can be just like everybody else. You can have what everybody else has. And so that's what ADAPT's main focus has been. And the push for attendant programs and getting people out of nursing homes and institutions has become a more controversial, more difficult fight, because the nursing home lobby is so deeply entrenched.
Right.
It receives federal funding. A lot of people don't know that nursing homes get funding from HUD, from Housing and Urban Development, under the program 232. Now, I don't know if this is still true, but I knew it was then. But I mean, it was like the 232. They would help buy institutions like stuff that they need and help with the rent and everything, so you could be locked up. So, and we're, ADAPT has also been focusing, and if we get people out of the institutions, they need somewhere to live.
Well, thanks for being on, Jimmy.
I could say one more thing now, and I want to talk to the young generation. And I'm going to say this. It's like, don't take these things for granted. Don't think just because you have it, they won't try to take it. They will. I can tell you that as a gay man. They'll give you things, and then they'll try to take it back. So it's really up to this generation to keep this movement going and push more and harder and further. Demand everything. Demand everything until you really have true 100% equality and everything. Like, really push for health care, attending care, and everything. And there's kind of this thing where it's called, like, the new giant supermarket opened down here. So the ground level is there, and then you have to go up these escalators. Well, they have these revolving doors, and then the other doors are push. So if you're a person with a disability, you have to go in through the garage, the parking garage, to get to these automatic doors that open to get to the elevators. So it's really kind of like this. Yeah, we're giving your accessibility, but instead of you coming in the street, you're going to have to roll in through the parking garage. So that's just something, that's a trend that's starting in some places. It's like accessibility is like at the Whole Foods, it's the entrance level. You need an elevator to get in, and there's one elevator. So if you happen to go food shopping that day and that elevator is broke, you're SOL. So,
yeah.
The only thing I would say is to the younger generation, keep this going, fight, push, and demand, and don't ever take for granted that your rights are always guaranteed. They're not.
Right. Well, I think a lot of people have gotten a rude awakening over the last, couple of years at least.
Oh, yeah.
Who may have felt otherwise.
Right.
The other thing about that Whole Foods, you're talking about the one on Pennsylvania Avenue?
Yes.
Right? Yeah, there is another elevator, but that garage is impossible to get into in a wheelchair. It's like the one at the Giant is bad and difficult. Yeah. Although I would love to see someone park a wheelchair in one of the spots and just like one of the compact car spots and just go up, but
yeah, I mean, to me, the whole thing is like, and then it's like, you got to go in through the garage, so you got to breathe carbon monoxide, but already it's like a separate entrance.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're not coming in the front door directly. You're coming in, unless you drove your wheelchair accessible van, that's great, but otherwise, no, it's not so great. And kind of like what accessibility is sometimes is getting defined more by able-bodied people. And disabled people need to speak up more and say, why should I have to suck down carbon monoxide on my way into the supermarket? Why can't I come in the front door?
Right, and that's a very good question. And honestly, too, that Giant also has way too few accessible spots down there in that garage. I mean, it's I'll go there and buy groceries sometimes because it's just like it's convenient, it's nice, it's easy. But when there's like only 2 spots and there's like a whole corral for carts where there could be accessible spots instead, it's like, why are we doing this? It seems like a waste of space.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And it's like backhand accessibility. It's accessibility after a fact, but it's kind of backhand.
Yeah.
And that's lacking in, I don't know how many parking spaces there are offhand, but there's a certain fraction that should be for, vans that have wheelchair lifts, or accessible for people. There are people in wheelchairs that drive cars, and there's the strong upper body paras that can, whip their wheelchair out of the back of the car and then
they're like the little manual wheelchairs that can fold up.
Yeah, but it's like, but a lot of people who live downtown, and there are more people with disabilities living downtown now, you have to go in through a garage, and it's not the most pleasant place to go through.
Right. Well, and also, at least one of the streets going into that garage had a partial cobblestone part to it as well, right? Like Cherry Street
it's
around
all
there is cobblestone.
Yeah, so if you're running
Which-
over that in your wheelchair, it's like, really uncomfortable.
Oh gosh, I can't even believe that was a thing when horse and buggies was the way of transporting people around. Like that was just the way that they paved Philadelphia at that time. It's like that couldn't have been that comfortable for rich people at the time.
No. It couldn't have been, but now here we are. It's like nearly a quarter of century into the 21st century, and like, why do we still have these things?
Right? Yeah, it really doesn't make that much sense.
Some nostalgia for what? You weren't even alive in the 1800s. What are you nostalgic for? Come on. We don't need cobblestones. It's 2024.
Yeah.
Who grew up with cobblestones on their street? Come on.
And honestly, too, like, even walking on cobblestones sucks because, like, you slip your, I have ankles that are a little, they're not soft, but they easily tilt.
Yeah.
15 years of tap dance will do that to you.
Yeah.
So, my ankles will roll sometimes. And they'll just end up in the middle of the cobblestones. And it's like you get at least a twisted ankle, maybe a sprain. If you're lucky, it's mild, right? But it's just like, come on.
Yeah. Like nobody needs it. Get rid of it.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, Jimmy.
You're welcome.
I'm so excited that you were able to do this. This is great that we're able to talk about this, about a month before we're going to do our very own crawl in Harrisburg. So,
oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I definitely want to be there for that.
Yeah. May 1st.
Okay.
Make sure you be there.
All right.
All right.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Phill.
Mm-hmm.
Good talking to you.
All right. Well, that was great. Thanks, Jimmy, for coming on and doing that interview with me. I felt like I learned so much from this interview. It's wild.
Yes, thank you so much. We love you, Jimmy, and we miss Erik. So I wanted to talk to everybody about what's happening May 1st. We're so excited. As of today, we have over 70 people registered for the event. And so May 1st, we're asking everybody to come to Harrisburg, come in to the main rotunda and check in with Disability Pride Pennsylvania. We're going to be able to give you a packet of information about all the points that we want you to go over and to leave with your representatives and senators. The reason why we picked May 1st is because everybody has to be there for the day. So it's a perfect day for everybody to come in. We've asked folks to make appointments to see as many folks as they can in their area. And then for those folks who can't, to be able to go through and drop off this packet of information that includes information about accessible, affordable, integrated housing. It's going to talk about accessible transportation in Pennsylvania. It's going to talk about direct care support and how we are in such a crisis because they're not being paid. They're not getting the respect that they deserve. And we're also going to be talking about guardianship and the alternative to guardianship. So you're going to be able to come in, you're going to pick up the packets. We have them all ready for you. Inside that, in that packet will also be an invitation that you're going to hand to the folks to come out and join us at 1:00 for a press conference at the front of the building. So we're going to start a rally at noon out in front of the building. And from 12 to 1, we're going to be talking to folks about what's going on, some of the other points that folks would like to make. There will be snacks and waters. And then at 1 o'clock, we're going to have a press conference. We're going to get to hear from Theo Brady, who is the executive director of the National Council on Independent Living. We're going to hear from Brittany Boyd Chisholm, who is the new CEO of the Center for Independent Living in Central PA, which is the Harrisburg area. We're going to hear from Misty Dion, who is the Roads to Freedom Phill CEO. We're going to hear from Thomas Earl, who is a disability rights attorney and also the CEO of the Liberty Resources Phill. We're also going to hear from a young advocate and State Representative Joe Hohenstein, who is always a huge supporter of the work that we do. As a person with a disability, really understands this goal and what we want to accomplish. Somewhere during that press conference, we're going to let everybody know that it's now time, and we're going to start the crawl. And folks will, again, get out of their wheelchairs, throw away their walkers, their crutches, and climb the overwhelming number of steps that it takes to get to the Harrisburg State Capitol front entrance. For me, I made a choice last year. It was like, what did we want to do? Disability pride, because disability pride is all about being true to yourself. It's about self-advocacy, because when you advocate for yourself, you feel better, gives you pride in what you're doing. And so to me, like, all of this makes sense together. So I decided that I was tired of having to go in the back door. It's pretty, has a fountain, it lights up in different colors, but I want to go in the front door of the Capitol building like everybody else. And so we're going to ask Governor Josh Shapiro, to make the front entrance of the Capitol building accessible for all Pennsylvanians, because it is a civil right to be able to come in the door like everybody else. As a disability community, we have to go through the back door because it's the only way it's accessible for us to get in. So I wanted to make sure that we made a statement. We have a governor who I believe will take notice, at least have a conversation about it. Hopefully we'll at least think about what the options could be. And so that is what we're planning, and we're asking folks to come in. You don't have to crawl if that's not something you can do. Come and support the folks who are. Come as allies and support us. There's nothing that says that you have to be a person with a disability to join any of our events. This is something for everybody. We create any of our events for the community. We just focus on disability while we're there in that space. So I'm super excited. We have such excitement going on. You can learn more on our website. If you go to disabilitypridepa.org and go to the Disability Pride Harrisburg Day at the Capitol event. And again, we want to make sure that we thank Jimmi for giving us his time. Thank you, Phill, for doing that interview.
Yeah, of course.
We want to, again, thank our corporate partners, Highmark Whole Care, for sponsoring this podcast. And we want to make sure everybody has a great day. And please join us May 1st.
All right. Well, I think that's it for our episode today. Everyone, have a great day. Hope to see you at Harrisburg.
Please visit our accessible website at www.disabilitypridepa.org. You can find us on social media at Disability Pride PA on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok.